The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by Chaplain Kibben.
Would you pray with me? God, our healer, as we draw awareness this month to defeating the foe that is breast cancer, we lay before you the friends and loved ones who this day are coming to terms with a recent diagnosis, who are in the throes of treatment, or who, by your grace, stand as survivors of this insidious disease. Holy God, you know their names. You know that neither young nor old, women nor men have been spared the terror of this threat. You are keenly aware of their journey through the shock and denial, the loss and frustrations they have faced along the way. Remind them that neither are any denied your abiding presence. Come alongside each one and give them courage to face this day. Grant them strength when they are sapped of their energy. Bestow upon them a sense of peace when tempers rage against the betrayal of their bodies. And give them hope for another day to enjoy the loved ones who toil alongside them in this battle to live. O great physician, we pray especially on behalf of those who cannot pray for themselves. Heal their souls, that in all things they will find their wholeness in your love. O Lord, hear our prayers for healing, for cures, and in your mercy for those we have lost. In the strength of your name we pray. Amen. Thank you.
Pursuant to Section 11 of House Resolution 188, the Journal of the Last Day's Proceedings is approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentlewoman from Michigan, Congresswoman Lawrence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The chair will entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. Does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
I request recognition to speak for 1 moment. 1 minute, I'm sorry.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise to recognize the life and service of Bishop Philip Brooks, who passed away at 88 years old as the first assistant presiding bishop of the Church of God in Christ. After moving to Michigan in 1949, Bishop Brooks became a leader in the faith community for Detroit. He was also the first African-American pastor to broadcast on television in Detroit. Bishop Brooks also stressed and taught the importance of relationships and service within the community. The bishop became the supporter of several Detroit initiatives, including Charles Wright Museum of African American Arts, and he raised money and resources to aid the displaced New York workers after 9/11 and supported efforts for the victims of Hurricane Katrina. His 36 years on the executive board of the Church of God in Christ was the longest of any bishop. Detroit and the faith communities will always remember Bishop Brooks for his devoted service. I take personal privilege to honor his spiritual leadership for me and for my family, the Cranford family, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Iowa seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today as a veteran to recognize an amazing achievement of a fellow servicewoman in Iowa. Last month, Private First Class Taylor Patterson, a student at Iowa State University, became the first female enlisted infantry soldier in the Iowa National Guard after being the first Iowa woman to complete the rigorous 22-week training program at Fort Benning, Georgia. 5 years ago, the United States Army began to allow women to serve in combat positions, given that they can pass the same base physical requirement for all combat personnel. Through determination and the support of her family and team at Fort Benning, Private First Class Patterson blazed a trail for generations of Iowa women. For over 183 years, the Iowa National Guard has been an excellent example of service above self by always answering their call to duty, whether it is assisting communities in disaster relief efforts, like we saw with last year's derecho in Iowa, or being deployed to Afghanistan this year to aid in the refugee crisis. Iowa's National Guard has always gone above and beyond in their service to our state and our country. Congratulations, Private First Class Patterson, for your service and for being a trailblazer for women everywhere. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, please.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the United Auto Workers on strike at John Deere and to express my heartfelt condolences for a devastating loss. We woke up to tragic news this morning that a worker in Milan, Illinois was crossing the street by the picket line and was struck and killed. This is heartbreaking. He was just described to me as a quiet and kind person, the type of guy who would make you laugh. My prayers are with his family and with all of the striking UAW workers today. These workers have put their lives on the line in more ways than one. At the height of the pandemic, Deere employees in the district that I serve were deemed essential, even making thousands of anti-COVID face shields that Deere donated to help keep others safe. They were working 10 and 12-hour shifts. John Deere is an iconic, homegrown American company, part of the fabric of the community where I live. And when a business is as successful as Deere & Company, they need to make sure that their workers are rewarded for that, and they are key to that success. These workers have earned a fair deal. I have faith in John Deere, and I stand with our UAW workers. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, you hear a lot today about the gain of dysfunction research. Gain of dysfunction research that's going on right here in Washington, D.C., and I say it's time we put a stop to it. This gain of dysfunction research leads us to all kinds of problems in our country that we weren't facing before January 3 of this year, and most definitely before January 20th of this year. Our friends across the aisle have proposed $5.5 trillion in new spending, $2.1 trillion in new tax income, highest level of spending, the highest level of tax increases in history. Now they can say no one under $400,000 has to pay these new taxes, but through the dysfunction of Congress and the White House, this gain of dysfunction research must stop. People under $400,000 are paying 42.1% more for gas. It's kind of a status symbol today to be able to fill up your tank with gas. Gas utilities, 20.6% up. I only wish in my hometown that's all we were going to face this winter. Propane, kerosene, firewood up 27%. The energy crisis, national average gas up to $3.38, and not to mention the dysfunction going on at our border, the worst border crisis in 30 years, 192,000 in apprehensions. And I say it's time to end the state of dysfunction in Washington, D.C. research. I yield back.
Expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor Aristides de Sousa Mendes, a Portuguese diplomat and hero who single-handedly saved tens of thousands of lives of people fleeing the Nazi persecution in 1940. On October 19, 2021, Sousa Mendes was laid to rest in the National Pantheon in Lisbon, Portugal. He was proudly Portuguese and had a deep love of country, family, and the arts. He served as the Portuguese consul general in Bordeaux, France in 1940. When Hitler launched his invasion of France on May 10th, millions of people suddenly found themselves in imminent danger from the Nazi attack. Thousands sought visas in the consulate in Bordeaux trying to escape. In June of 1940, Sousa Mendes issued an estimated 30,000 visas, including roughly 10,000 Jews fleeing for their lives with their families. Despite the Salazar regime having forbidden their diplomats in Portugal from issuing such visas to refugees. The Israeli historian Yudan Bada cited Sousa Mendes' actions as perhaps the largest rescue action by a single individual during the Holocaust. As a punishment for disobeying the mandates of his country's regime with Salazar, Sousa Mendes was stripped of his job, denied a pension, pushed into poverty. His home was repossessed and suffered 2 strokes before passing away in 1954. He said, and I quote, "I may have erred," he wrote, "but if I did so, I did it unintentionally, having followed my voice of my conscience, which never failed to guide me in the fulfillment of my duties in full awareness of my responsibilities." After years without recognition for his heroism, I commend the decision to lay Sousa Mendes to rest in the National Pantheon, celebrating his courage. So please join me in honoring Ortiz de Sousa Mendes, and thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The cost of living keeps getting more expensive, and we're reminded of that every time we fill up our cars and trucks. Gasoline prices at a 7-year high are putting a strain on family budgets. When asked about surging gas prices, President Biden said, and I quote, "I don't have a near-term solution." Well, Republicans do, with bills languishing in committee. His lack of solutions is a little comfort to struggling families. Meanwhile, the President's $5 trillion tax and spending plan advances extreme policies that will increase consumer costs and undermine American energy. That includes imposing a new tax on home heating bills, as well as an arbitrary drilling moratorium on federal lands. Banning domestic energy production will only increase reliance on foreign energy sources, and motorists everywhere will pay with higher prices at the pump. Let's stop this reckless spending spree and attack on American energy before it's too late. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Virgin Islands seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you. While in my district a few weeks ago, I spoke with my constituents about the Democratic Party's plan to build our country back better after the pandemic. The people of the Virgin Islands agree with me that we have reached an inflection point, that this is our moment to prove to the American people that their government works for the people, not just those at the top. As President Biden always said, we need to reward work in this country, not just wealth. Build Back Better means creating millions of jobs while tackling the climate crisis and ensuring that America will not only compete, but lead the way to clean energy future. Meanwhile, its transformative investments in women and families, childcare, paid leave, home-based care, universal pre-K will unlock full economic potential of parents in the workforce. It also includes historic investment in workforce training to connect workers to jobs. Democrats have already made sure 40 million American families received a tax cut through the Biden Child Tax Credit, which is helping cut child poverty in half. Build Back Better doubles down on those investments, resulting in one of the largest middle-class tax cuts ever. This is our opportunity to build back better. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sadly, the Biden inflation is ongoing, and families are struggling to survive as jobs are being destroyed. Last month, I shared the Labor Department report the Consumer Price Index for August was rising at the fastest pace in 13 years. This continued in September, and here are a few price increase examples. Gasoline up 42.1%, gas utilities up 20.6%, bacon up 19.3%, eggs up 12.6%, children's shoes up 11.9%, fresh fish and seafood up 10.7%. Biden tax and spend policies cause inflation and destroy jobs. Clearly, the Democrat elite think they are smarter than anyone, with the Democrat voters they see as ignorant, making a claim of $3.5 trillion will have zero cost. In conclusion, God bless our troops who successfully protected America for 20 years as the global war on terrorism continues moving from Afghanistan to America. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House floor for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
In the midst of a statewide drought emergency, the Central Valley experienced considerable rainstorms this week. While communities across my district are incredibly grateful for this rainfall, we know this relief will be short-lived. Farmers are desperate for water to grow their crops, and rural towns continue to face water shortages. We're grateful for this rain. We need this rain. But we need this administration to understand the dire nature of our situation and take appropriate measures to capture our most precious resource. I've asked time and time again for support from the House majority to address this issue. I have expressed the urgent need for action to prepare for exactly the opportunity that has been pointlessly wasted this week. The families in my district cannot continue to wait. I ask my colleagues yet again to join my efforts to improve water infrastructure and water management in California. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
I'd like to ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
I'd like to talk one more time about the reconciliation bill that may be before us very soon. We began this session with a great electoral victory for Black Lives Matter, who on their website said, "We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure." First of all, I think that's just insulting because we have nuclear families all over the world. But in any event, I look at the reconciliation bill is now before us, and it looks to me like a payoff to people who want to discriminate against the nuclear family. Whether you look at the earned income tax credit, all the additional money in low-income housing, or the increase in Pell Grants, they are all additional money that will be disproportionately very difficult for nuclear families to access. I strongly reject voting for this bill because in the future we must no longer punish people who decide to live in old-fashioned nuclear families. Thank you.
For what purpose the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
This fall, along with the cooler temperatures that autumn always brings, Tennesseans and Americans all across the country will be subjected to record-breaking prices to heat our homes. Under the Biden administration, costs for natural gas, the most common resource for heating our homes, have skyrocketed. With inflation at a 30-year high, families are already stretched thin as they pay more at the grocery store and at the gas pump, but it doesn't stop there. Families are now expected to pay more in energy costs to heat their homes, as much as 54% for some households for the fall and winter months for Americans. Included in their more than $5 trillion social spending agenda is a natural gas tax and bans on domestic energy and mineral production, which will cause us to obtain these vital resources from OPEC, Russia, and even China. As Democrats continue to push their tax and spend agenda, it is middle and low-income families who will be hit the hardest by far-left energy policies. President Biden must now act to avert this impending energy crisis.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor an American hero. Jared Keyworth from Mandeville, Louisiana, served as a senior inspector with the United States Marshal Service and tragically lost his life in the line of duty earlier this month. Senior Inspector Keyworth began his service with the Marshal Service in 2010 and took on assignments in Denver, Miami, and New Orleans. Most recently, he was selected to serve in the Marshals Technical Operations Group in Baton Rouge. Prior to Jared's service with the Marshals, he served in the United States Army's Old Guard. During President Reagan's funeral, Jared escorted the riderless horse, the symbol of a fallen leader who will never ride again. On September 28th of 2021, Jared was critically wounded while in pursuit of a violent felony offender. He passed away on October 1st. Jared will forever be in our hearts and minds, and we are eternally grateful to his service to our great country. Yield back, Mr. Speaker.
And yields back.
The chair lays before the House a communication.
The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, Madam, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on October 27, 2021 at 9:43 a.m. That the Senate passed Senate 1872, that the Senate passed without amendment H.R. 1899. Signed sincerely, Cheryl L. Johnson, Clerk.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The House will resume proceedings on postponed questions at a later time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 5661, the Continued State Flexibility to Assist Older Foster Youth Act.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 5661, a bill to extend flexible use of John H. Chaffee Foster Care Independence Program funding to address pandemic-related challenges for older foster youth.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, and the gentlewoman from Indiana, Ms. Walorski, will each control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, I now yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
The COVID-19 pandemic hit all of our communities hard, but for vulnerable youth in foster care, it was terrifying, especially for those youth approaching the age of independence, at which they lose access to the supports and foster care that foster care provides. When my good friend, Congresswoman Jackie Walorski, and I teamed up last year to provide states with flexibility and funding to help these youth, we hoped and expected that the pandemic would be over by now and that these youth would be back on track, getting an education, starting jobs, finding a place to live, and establishing independent lives. Unfortunately, the Delta variant hit hard, creating a new wave of challenges for these youth. To the current and former foster youth who reached out to us and our colleagues to share their stories, we hear you, and we are committed to continuing to respect the lessons of your lived experiences in foster care. The legislation we are considering today, the Continued State Flexibility to Assist Older Foster Youth Act, will restore and continue key program flexibilities that allow states to provide greater stability and certainty to current and former youth via the John H. Chaffee Foster Care Independence Program. The bill will give states the flexibility to continue providing the specific supports that older foster youth need to return to college, training programs, and work. It will extend flexibilities to secure housing, to gain independence through driving programs, and to allow youth who would otherwise age out of eligibility for services a little more support to weather the pandemic. I firmly believe in the strong bipartisan partnership that Representative Walorski and I have built over the years to help vulnerable youth and families to improve our child welfare system. We have a lot to do to help foster youth through this pandemic, and this legislation to allow states to make better use of the funding we provided is the first step. I urge all of my colleagues to support this important legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 5661, the Continued State Flexibility to Assist Older Foster Youth Act. America's most vulnerable foster youth face unique challenges even in normal times, and the COVID-19 pandemic created even more obstacles to overcome. Nearly 20,000 youth age out of foster care every year. While the COVID pandemic has presented difficulties for all Americans, foster youth and former foster youth are particularly vulnerable, given that they are most likely to be without reliable adults and other kinds of support in their lives. The continued state flexibility to assist older Foster Youth Act would allow states to keep in place important flexibilities in the Chafee Child Welfare Program so they can continue to support vulnerable foster youth in Indiana and across the country. I'm grateful to Chairman Davis for his continued partnership in building on our past reforms to help families thrive and this committee's tradition of bipartisan action to protect young people in our foster care system. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I now yield as much time as she might consume to Representative Judith Chu.
Gentlelady is recognized for as much time as she may consume.
I rise today in support of H.R. 5661, the Continued State Flexibility to Assist Older Foster Youth Act. We have heard directly from foster youth that aging out of the system with unique challenges and that they are often left in this situation without the support of services or families to help them if they fall on hard times. This has been especially difficult throughout the COVID-19 pandemic as older and former foster youth have experienced homelessness, been laid off from work, endured food insecurity, and navigated negative impacts on their mental health. But states like California have devised ways to help, like letting foster youth who turn 21 continue receiving support and assistance through the Child Welfare Agency. Additionally, at the end of last year, Congress provided states with additional funds in the year-end omnibus specifically to help this population, many of whom were not eligible for federal stimulus payments. And in California, we're working to get this funding directly to impacted youth via direct cash payments. Unfortunately, the pandemic has made it harder to get these funds directly into the hands of the young people who need them, causing needless delays and hardship. That is why I am happy to support H.R. 5661 to extend support to our young adults and ensure that they have all of the tools they need to make it through this unprecedented time. By extending the programmatic flexibilities in the Chafee program, which helps current and former foster youth prepare for independent adult living, we are keeping young people safe and housed and also ensuring access to supportive services for those youth affected by the COVID-19 crisis. I've had the privilege to meet with foster youth from across the country throughout the years, and I have been impressed with their resilience and ability to advocate for themselves. But they don't have to do it alone. I'm proud to support this bill, which will help foster youth shape a better future for themselves and our whole country. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from Indiana.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Bacon.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate my colleagues from Indiana and Illinois. I rise today in support of H.R. 5661, the continued state flexibility to assist older foster youth. We can all agree that our children and youth have suffered tremendously during this pandemic. Foster youth that aged out of the system are hurting and feel forgotten. We can come together to support these youth through continuing states' flexibility with the Chafee funds to assist older foster youth. The act will allow the emergency Chafee funds flexibilities that we implemented during the pandemic to continue through fiscal year 2022. It will give youth the option to re-enter foster care that aged out during the pandemic, remove the living expenses cap, and expand the educational training funds to assist them. We hear more and more from youth that need our help. As a foster to adopt parent, I know that our foster youth need our help, and we need to make sure that we hold to our responsibility to fully support them during this crisis. Young adults who have aged out of foster care are the #1 risk for homelessness in that age group. We have the opportunity here to make a difference. With that, I thank you for the time, and I yield back to my colleague from Indiana.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Wisconsin, Representative Moore.
Gentlelady from Wisconsin is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you so very, very much for yielding to me, Mr. Chairman Davis. I just want to thank him and Ranking Member Walorski for bringing this bill forward. Foster youth are, of course, some of our nation's most vulnerable. But you know what? They're also our most resilient. But even the most resilient need support. And that's what this bill is all about, ensuring that those who would otherwise age out of foster care at age 18, who choose it or need it, can continue to get services, housing, and workforce development, driving skills through this pandemic. For thousands of foster youth each year, their time in foster care simply because they turn 18 or in 21 in some state can be a very, very unsettling moment for them. As a result, with little or no family support, they suddenly find themselves grown, independent. But the reality is that the battle is only the beginning in these youth's lives who've already have suffered trauma, including family separation. They find themselves without any type of safety net during this particularly trying time in any person's life. And to be sure, these are inspiring young people. But again, they need support to help ensure brighter futures. I want to talk about one of these youth who I had the pleasure to get to know. His struggle is full of struggles and victories, but they're not the exception. This was Mr. DJ Joy. You know, I first met DJ when he shadowed me during Foster Youth Day a few years ago. He had such a great heart, great personality, extremely intelligent, that he quickly became a part of my own personal family. DJ's drive and resilience helped him create a bright future for himself. He knew firsthand the difficulties facing those aging out of the foster care system, challenges that he shared with me. Passing this legislation would work. 30 seconds.
Additional minute to the lady from Wisconsin.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. You know, this bill is a good step, but let's recognize and address the supports we need to provide foster youth. We need to require all states to raise the maximum age to 21 for those who choose to help keep receiving foster care supportive services. We need to think about permanently removing the barriers and the cap on the use of Chaffee funds for housing. Karen Bass and I have a bill that would immediately allow former foster youth to keep Medicaid coverage through age 26. Healthcare is a critical need. I just want to thank the chairwoman, the ranking member, and I urge all members to support this great initiative, and I yield back to the chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from Indiana.
I reserve.
Reserves. Gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Michigan, Representative Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise today in support of HR 5561, the continued state flexibility to assist older Foster Youth Act. As co-chair of the Congressional Caucus on Foster Youth, this issue is incredibly important to me. In my home state of Michigan, there's approximately 13,000 children in foster care. Unfortunately, they have been at particular risk during this COVID-19 pandemic. This legislation will make meaningful action to ensure the states have the opportunity to assist children in foster care by extending pandemic-related provisions passed under the Consolidated Appropriations Act for additional year. I am confident that these flexibilities will help states like my own Michigan provide foster children with the assistance they need. We must do everything in our power to assist and support at-risk youth. It is necessary that we follow through on this commitment to them. I often remind people Foster children are a ward of the state, and it's our responsibility. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlewoman from Indiana
I reserve, Mr.
reserves.
Speaker.
Gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Rhode Island, Congressman Langevin.
Gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for a minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I rise in strong support of the continued state flexibility to assist Older Foster Youth Act. Last month, I hosted a town hall with the National Foster Youth Institute for current and former foster youth across the country. Their stories of hardship broke my heart, and I was not surprised, though, because these young people are among the most vulnerable in our society, often lacking the same social safety net that you or I could rely on in a crisis. Surveys throughout the pandemic have shown foster youth face elevated financial, housing, and food insecurity, decreased educational and workforce participation, and increased isolation. This bill before us today extends crucial flexibilities for the Chafee Foster Care Program that we put in place last December, allowing states to better meet the needs of current and former foster youth. So, Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support the bill and help young people access this much-needed assistance. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Indiana
I continue to reserve, Mr.
continues
Speaker.
to reserve. Gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no further speakers, and I will simply say that I'm very pleased that we are considering this important legislation that will provide additional help to foster children and give states the flexibility that they need to provide all of the assistance during this pandemic that foster children can make use of. I thank my ranking member tremendously for the bipartisanship we have been able to effect, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentlelady from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In December, we worked together to take action to help foster youth through the pandemic so they could build a stronger, more stable future. That bill, called the Supporting Foster Youth Through the Pandemic Act, provided much-needed additional support for foster youth and families, at-risk pregnant women and mothers and kinship caregivers, including grandparents. The bill included $400 million in funding to assist states in supporting foster youth transitioning to adulthood during the pandemic. That relief has provided a lifeline for thousands of youth to get back to school, back into jobs, and to the path of self-sufficiency. As COVID-19 continues to spur instability, young people with experience in foster care still face significant challenges to meet their basic needs and access critical funds and services. According to the Department of Health and Human Services, 75% of these funds remain unobligated by states as of September 30th, 2021, and states have another year to spend. In recognition of the needs of foster youth, this bill will extend those key programmatic flexibilities for another year. I urge my colleagues to support these vulnerable foster youth by voting for H.R. 5661 and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. All time has expired. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 5661? Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4035, the Real Justice for Our Veterans Act of 2021, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 112, H.R. 4035, a bill to amend the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968 to prioritize veterans' court treatment programs that ensure equal access for racial and ethnic minorities and women and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, and the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Bentz, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas.
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
I am the proud sponsor and proud of H.R. 4035, the Real Justice for Our Veterans Act, is before the House for consideration, and I ask all my colleagues to support this bipartisan bill today. I authored the Real Justice for Our Veterans Act to help our nation's justice-involved veterans to improve the delivery of services in veterans and drug courts. The bill before the House today has 3 discrete aims. First, the bill would expand data collection regarding the effectiveness of veterans courts. Second, it authorized a pilot program that would investigate and promote promising retention models in veterans and drug courts. And lastly, and perhaps most critically, it would open up drug treatment courts to veterans in areas where there may not be a veterans court. So very important for those who have interacted with our committee and have made note of the fact that there are many jurisdictions in the United States where there are veterans and no veterans court. Each of these critical changes would promote higher participation and higher rehabilitation of veterans who have mental health and substance abuse issues. The need for this legislation is painfully clear. Generations of veterans have served abroad in recent decades, and we must redouble our efforts to support veterans and expand the services they need to thrive. The rapid expansion of veterans treatment courts speaks not only to the need for such courts, but more importantly to the benefit of the specialized approach to rehabilitation and treatment the courts offer. The holistic treatment model, which includes input from the prosecutor, defense counsel, and the court, centers on the supervised comprehensive treatment provided by the Department of Veterans Affairs or community organizations. Because each veterans court offers different management services, we need to do more to identify which treatment options are successful so that these promising models can be expanded. That is why the elements of the Real Justice for Our Veterans Act are so important. The bill also calls for additional data on the demographics of who is referred to veterans treatment courts and asks for information on completion rates. This information will be critical to advancing our understanding of how the programs are used. Additionally, the legislation authorizes a new pilot program that will allow DOJ to test promising retention programs that promote greater enrollment and participation by veterans through the duration of their treatment program. Legislative efforts to strengthen veterans' treatment courts have yielded bipartisan support in the past, and the same is true today. I thank our colleague, the gentleman from Florida, Representative John Rutherford, for co-sponsoring the bill and working with me in this effort. And I urge colleagues to take a look at their congressional districts. You will probably find places of refuge for our veterans. Some, however, may be homeless. But I have several facilities in my congressional district that deal with the housing of homeless veterans, or deal with services for homeless veterans, or deal with services, period, for veterans. I can assure you that a comforting judicial system on veterans who, because of combat injuries, PTSD, and other issues dealing with them, losing the family, being separated from the family, being miles away from their home because of combat-impacted injuries, that the judicial system is one they may come in contact with. To be able to have courts that are responsive to their service and their record, and to be able to help move them away from the judicial system is a tribute to our commitment to the service of our men and women. And so I urge my colleagues to continue this record of support for veterans treatment courts by voting for this bill today. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 4035, the Real Justice for Our Veterans Act of 2021. Unfortunately, many of our nation's veterans suffer from substance abuse disorders, mental health conditions, and trauma. According to data from the Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Statistics, approximately 60% of combat veterans in our nation's prisons have reported mental health disorders. Veterans treatment court programs are modeled after other specialized treatment court programs, such as drug treatment courts, to provide services specific to meet the unique needs of veterans. Veterans treatment courts are not only designed to benefit veterans in the criminal justice system, but taxpayers as well. These treatment programs lower recidivism for participants who complete them, saving money that otherwise would have been spent on incarceration. H.R. 4035 will expand data collection on these treatment programs to ensure that our veterans are getting the most effective treatment possible. H.R. 4035 also authorizes pilot programs to make grants to improve retention rates in veteran treatment court programs. It allows veterans in jurisdictions that do not operate veteran court programs to participate in drug courts instead. Congress must do everything in its power to protect our nation's veterans and ensure that they get the very best treatment, and this is exactly what this bill does. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this bill, and with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas.
Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume, and I'm prepared to close. The gentleman has no further speakers?
No speakers.
Thank you so very much. So let me reserve time for the gentleman to close, make his closing remarks, please.
The gentlelady yields time to the gentleman from Oregon to close.
I reserve. Gentleman is.
Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Okay. Gentlelady from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire how much time is remaining?
Gentlelady has 16 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, this has been a journey for me in terms of dealing with veterans who are in need of help. Some years ago, I joined with the late and former member of the military, Chairman Murtha, to bring a satellite site to my congressional district of post-traumatic stress disorder. So the center was outside of the Veterans Hospital, but could be accessed by veterans through TRICARE. So I have seen the needs of veterans who have experienced the impact of combat, the impact of service, but still committed to duty. This particular legislation responds and respects that duty. That is the duty that we owe to those who have fallen along the highway of challenges. And I want to make sure that we have the treatment for those who've experienced substance abuse, as well as that we have the judicial system that responds to that need. And it may cross the gamut of substance abuse, alcohol abuse, and of course, the encounter with the criminal justice system. I want to thank Chairman Nadler of the Judiciary Committee, and as the chair of the Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security Committee, my members of my subcommittee, because it shows that our work is expansive. It also includes rehabilitation and treatment and fairness, justice, finding ways to have people steer away from incarceration and, of course, an encounter over and over again with the judicial system or the criminal justice system. So veterans treatment court programs around the country have successfully provided support to veterans struggling with substance abuse or mental health issues. We have seen them work effectively. The need to expand veterans treatment court services is real and immediate. We look forward to this bill moving in the other body and the President of the United States signing it and saying to veterans, we want to be helpful to you in your time of celebration of who you are as a veteran, but in your time of need. Based on the most recent data, the Bureau of Justice Statistics estimates that approximately 181,500 veterans are incarcerated in jail, as well as state and federal prisons. Mr. Speaker, that is too many who have been lost to the abusing of drugs, alcohol, and substance abuse. H.R. 4035 would help rehabilitate justice-involved veterans and ultimately make for a safer community and give them a better quality of life, and might I say, give their families a better quality of life. I urge my colleagues to join me in voting in favor of this important bill, and, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. All time has expired. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4035 as amended? Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to recommit it is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an I move to suspend the rules and pass S. 9021, the Jamie Zapata and Victor Avila Federal Officers and Employees Protection Act.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 921, an act to amend Title 18 United States Code to further protect officers and employees of the United States and for other purposes.
All members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
The gentlelady will suspend. Gentleman from Texas? Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, and the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Bentz, each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas.
I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection, and the gentlelady is recognized.
I rise in support of S. 921, the Jamie Zapata Victor Avila Federal Officers and Employees Protection Act. This Senate-passed bill would correct a manifest wrong by making clear that the law prohibiting the killing of federal employees extends beyond American borders. Our Justice Department must have the ability to ensure that anyone who kills or attempts to kill individuals serving our country outside the United States are brought to justice under current law. The tragic circumstances that make this bill necessary bear repeating. Immigration Customs Enforcement Special Agents Jamie Zapata and Victor Avila were assigned aboard to protect American interests. In early 2011, while traveling in a convoy near San Luis Potosi, Mexico, the American agents were attacked by members of the Los Zetas drug cartel. In the firefight, both agents Zapata and Agent Avila were shot. Tragically, Agent Zapata died from his wounds. A thorough investigation brought the perpetrators of this heinous act to the United States to stand to account for the acts, and they were convicted. Yet justice remained unfulfilled. January 2020, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals vacated the murder conviction of 2 Los Zetas cartel members responsible for the murder of Agent Zapata and attempted murder of Agent Avila. In doing so, the Court of Appeals found that the law we are amending today did not contain an adequate expression that it was intended to apply to crimes committed outside the United States. Today, we correct this errant and seemingly and apparently unfair judicial interpretation. This bill does not extend criminal laws or penalties, nor does it create a new crime. It merely clarifies Congress' original intent. Because of this bill, the United States government may prosecute anyone who killed or attempted to kill a federal officer or employee, whether they be agents or diplomats, while they were performing their official duties outside of the United States. The rule of law will prevail. Interestingly enough, since the killings in that tragic incident, we have seen a number of attacks against many of our outstanding federal employees and others, diplomats overseas. That is all this bill would do, but it is an important thing to do. I thank my fellow Texan Representative Henry Cuellar, Michael McCall, for leading the House companion to this bill, and I urge my colleagues to support this legislation out of basic and endearing justice for all and for the families of these men. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of Senate 921, the Jaime Zapata and Victor Avila Federal Officers and Employees Protection Act. In 2011, members of the Los Zetas drug cartel gunned down ICE agents Jaime Zapata and Victor Avila in an attempted carjacking. Agent Zapata was killed. The perpetrators of this terrible crime were members of a Los Zetas hit squad on a mission that day to shoot and steal vehicles for cartel operations. The murder and attempted carjacking occurred in Mexico. The perpetrators were extradited to the United States to face trial for the murder and attempted murder of the American agents. In 2017, the cartel members were convicted under Section 1114 of Title 18 of the United States Code, which prohibits the killing of an officer of the United States. They were sentenced to life in prison. On appeal, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that because the crimes occurred on foreign soil, Section 1114 did not apply. In light of this ruling, federal law enforcement officers and civil servants stationed overseas are made more vulnerable to attack. The decision created a circuit split and opened a loophole in federal law, reversing centuries of precedent that the law was intended to apply extraterritorially. The bill simply codifies centuries of precedent and legal understanding by clarifying the extraterritorial application of 3 federal statutes to protect our federal law enforcement officers and other federal officials. The bill passed the Senate by unanimous consent in May. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to be able to yield 3 minutes to the original sponsor of this legislation, Mr. Cuellar, distinguished gentleman from Texas.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I also want to thank Representative Jackson Lee for her leadership in this effort to make sure that we protect not only our diplomats, but our agents that work there. I also want to thank Michael McCall, one of my co-leads on this, Bill Pascual, Vicente, Filemon Vela, and other members, both bipartisan, that support this. On the Senate side, the lead sponsor was Senator John Cornyn and also Senator Chris Coons and a whole bunch of other folks, and I certainly want to say thank you so much. This legislation is important because this is a bipartisan bill, and it ensures that individuals who harm or attempt to harm a U.S. federal officer or employees serving abroad can be brought to justice and prosecuted in the United States. Furthermore, this bill improves the safety. It will improve the safety and the security of not only the agents, but any diplomat or any federal employee that works outside the U.S. or overseas by ensuring that crimes that are committed against Americans serving abroad can be prosecuted by United States courts. As the Chairwoman mentioned a few minutes ago, it was very unfortunate what happened in this, and it's a change on we want to make sure that the intent of the law that has been there will be followed, and that basically just means that Section 114 of the United States Code would say that if it also covers foreign jurisdiction. So therefore, we ask that we support this legislation because, as it was mentioned, on February 15th, 2011, ICE Special Agent Jaime Zapata and also his colleague Victor Avila were ambushed by members of the Mexican drug cartels in San Luis Potosí, Mexico. Unfortunately, as it's been mentioned, Special Agent Zapata died because of his injuries. ICE Agent, Special Agent Jaime Zapata murder cannot be brought to justice because of that loophole in the current law. and this bipartisan legislation will close that loophole and ensure that the safety of all federal employees serving our nation abroad will be protected. There must be severe consequences brought to bear against any individual that harms any of the federal employees that are serving abroad. We need to know that this heroism of Special Agent Zapata and also of Special Agent Avila, by holding those people who committed violence, are held accountable. Furthermore, this issue or this bill is also important to me because Special Agent Zapata was assigned to the Homeland Security Investigations Office located in my hometown, Laredo, Texas, while he served on the Human Smuggling and Trafficking Unit, as well as the Border Enforcement Security Task Force, known as BEST. So with that, I urge my colleagues to support this important legislation. And with that, I say thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield the back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, this bill's about accountability. It's about leaving no American behind. The safety of our nation and our heroes who are willing to raise their hands and put their own lives on the line, regardless of if they are at home or abroad, is on the line right now. Tragically, a current loophole in federal law has allowed the killers of Jaime Zapata, a Texan and an American hero, to escape the murder convictions and sentences that they were found guilty for. And justice must be served. In 2011, as you've heard the details already, but to reiterate that 2 ICE agents, Jaime Zapata as well as Victor Avila, were deployed to Mexico to curb human and drug trafficking to our southern border. And that the 2 were ambushed and gunned down by members of a Mexican drug cartel who opened fire on them along Highway 57. Both agents were struck, and Jaime Zapata tragically died from his injuries. Weeks after the ambush, 7 of these killers were extradited to the United States, and 2 were found guilty of murder. But last year, a federal appeals court dismissed the murder convictions on the basis that the district court did not have jurisdiction over the crimes that were committed against these law enforcement agents who were stationed outside of our borders. And this is unacceptable, as has been mentioned. Anyone who attacks a U.S. federal agent who is protecting our country, whether at home or abroad, must be held accountable and must be brought to justice. I am proud to support this legislation, to work with my colleagues across the aisle, and I'm proud of the bipartisanship that Ms. Jackson Lee, Mr. Cuellar, and so many others have brought forward today. It's very important, and again, this goes to the heart of accountability. It goes to the heart of leaving no American behind. I appreciate also the leadership of Senators John Cornyn and Chris Coons on this very important initiative. Our country's heroes deserve to know that those of us in Congress, in a bipartisan way, will hold those to account who break the law. It's so important for us to stand by law enforcement, especially those who are willing to give it their all outside of our borders. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas.
Yeah. Let me inquire of the gentleman, do you have any further speakers? I'm prepared to close.
We have no more speakers.
Gentlelady
I reserve. I reserve.
Gentleman from Texas, or excuse me, Oregon.
Yeah, I'm prepared to close, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman is recognized.
I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentlelady from Texas.
Speaker, this legislation is necessary to ensure that federal employees who are serving overseas can be protected by the American umbrella of justice. And I yield myself such time as I consume. We have seen since this tragic incident of those who were serving our country and lost their life and were injured, we've seen a myriad of attacks on diplomats and others outside of the boundaries of war. We've been stunned by actions against diplomats in embassies and outside of embassies. So this is a bipartisan bill that was adopted by the Senate by unanimous consent, and I ask my colleagues to join me in supporting this legislation so the President can sign into law and to be able to tell all of our federal employees and diplomats that are standing in the name of that flag that is shown behind you, Mr. Speaker, that we do care about their service and their safety. I ask my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. All time has expired. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Senate Bill 921? Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass S-1502, the Confidentiality Opportunities for Peer Support COPS Act.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 1502, an act to make federal law enforcement officer peer support communications confidential and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, and the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Bentz, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas.
I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill under consideration. I yield myself such
Without
time as I may
objection,
consume.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Today I ask my colleagues to join me in supporting S-1502, the COPS Counseling Act, a bill that will encourage the adoption of law enforcement peer counseling programs across the country and protect the privacy of federal officers as they seek mental health support. It is important to all of us that we promote the mental health and well-being of our law enforcement officers, not only in order to help individual officers, but also because it helps bolster the safety of our communities and the people our officers take a solemn oath to protect. Law enforcement officers play a special role in our communities, specifically called upon to protect and serve. Often they see, encounter, and respond to horrendous situations that are both dangerous and stressful and often life-threatening. I don't know how many times, Mr. Speaker, we have heard on the news where officers have said, I've never seen this in my lifetime. I've never seen this horrific scene. I've never seen a car crash. I've never seen the violence. And with the pandemic of COVID-19, we have seen officers coming to scenes that they express that they've never seen. That has an impact, even though they must continue to rise the next day and serve. There are indeed first responders on the scene when unthinkable and tragic events take place, whether they be mass shootings, terrible incidents of domestic or sexual violence, and other horrific instances of victimization. Even after the incidents are over and the threats addressed, these situations can long remain with officers. As they seek to protect us, we must also seek to help them when they're in need. We're in a hearing today on issues dealing with gun safety. That is not this bill. But what I would say is that the officers in times of crisis are always the first ones to come to school shootings, violent scenes where they see children who are wounded or tragically are dead. Imagine an officer having to pick him or herself up and carry on after you see, yes, little children, high school, middle school, elementary school, who've been fallen because of school shootings. That is a particularly unique circumstance, but there are many, many others. That is why I support this bill, which would help officers who seek counseling. The bill provides confidentiality to federal law enforcement officers by restricting individuals who participate in a peer support counseling session from disclosing communications arising out of peer support counseling session. In doing so, however, the bill defines clear and necessary exceptions to confidentiality in circumstances including explicit threats of suicide, any admission of criminal conduct, any explicit threat of imminent and serious physical harm or death to an individual, any information related to the abuse or neglect of a child, older person, or vulnerable person, or any information that is required by law to be reported. That had to be clarified. Additionally, this bill encourages implementation of peer counseling programs within the entire first responder community by requiring the Department of Justice to make best practices publicly available on its website. Information I've found have been the key in helping to restore the stability of these individuals who are needing the kind of counseling that we offer. The Department of Justice is also required to provide a list of training programs for public safety officers to become peer support mentors. Always, we've been told that to have a like fellow traveler, a like experienced person, a like person in your career or profession is sometimes the best medicine, the best cure, or the best direction toward treatment. These are important steps that will help our officers and the communities they serve. As we take action on this Senate-passed bill, I want to recognize our colleague from Maryland, Representative David Trone, for his work in introducing the House companion legislation. I thank the chairman of our committee, Mr. Nadler, for being focused on this legislation, and I'm delighted that my subcommittee is also very interested in this kind of work. This is an important bill. I'm proud to support it and ask my colleagues to do the same. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of Senate 1502, the Cops Counseling Act of 2021. With recent attacks on law enforcement agencies from the left, including calls to defund the police, officers around the country have suffered from persistent and increasing physical and mental stress. Police departments are experiencing dropping retention rates, and officers are left with fewer colleagues to support them while facing more crime. As a result, the need for new and better performing peer support groups within state and local law enforcement agencies has risen. This bill would help alleviate some of the strain from dealing with the ever-increasing amounts of violent crime over the last year by supporting and encouraging the use of peer support groups. Some people feel like there's a stigma related to addressing mental health needs, making mental wellness difficult to address. Peer support programs can help address this challenge in the law enforcement community. Officers who are in need of help may be most comfortable reaching out to their fellow officers, especially if their confidentiality is protected. This bill requires the Department of Justice, in consultation with the Department of Health and Human Services, to develop a report of best practices for peer support programs. These best practices required under the Cops Counseling Act will help state and local law enforcement agencies establish new peer counseling programs and enhance existing ones. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
Yeah, but I'm talking about state as well. Oh, yes. Okay. Let me yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I want to again emphasize the massive number of law enforcement officers across the nation. There are, first of all, 18,000 police departments and of varying levels, meaning that we think of police or constables or sheriff, all of them law enforcement officers. And every day as we speak, they're out on the front lines and again, seeing enormous tragedy. I really want to emphasize what it means to come up on a scene dealing with injury to a child. Gun violence, car crashes, fires, police go to those scenes as well. And for too long, we have not stopped for a moment to provide these resources and to provide these services. I hope that as we pass this legislation, this will be the catalyst for local entities to build on their mental health relief, and that they'll also focus on peer-directed mental health relief. We can imagine in the course of all the scenes that we've seen in this body, on this floor, in this year, starting with January 6th, where police officers were involved, that there is no doubt that this legislation is crucial, but it works across the nation, and it should be a tool for ensuring the strength and the stability of our officers who are out there, men and women, family members, every single day. With that, I reserve.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Rutherford.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank the gentlelady from Texas for bringing this bill forward. It is very much needed. I rise, Mr. Speaker, to support the Cops Counseling Act, which is now one step away from reaching the President's desk, I hope. I spent over 40 years in law enforcement, including 12 as sheriff of Duval County, Florida. So I can tell you I've seen firsthand the challenges that some officers face in dealing with not just acute stress for many years, but the chronic stress over every day that they go to work. It's no secret that law enforcement is a dangerous profession. But these officers face potential life-threatening situations every day they go to work. And that's the chronic stress that really has a significant mental health impact upon these officers. Every day they put their lives in that breach in defense of our communities. And in recent years, we've seen a rise in ambush killings of officers and just overall assaults on officers, attacking them simply for the uniform that they wear. And in fact, by just the middle of this year, we experienced as many shootings and killings of police officers that we did for the entire year of 2020. We also witness now the demoralization, the delegitimization, and the defunding of police currently taking place around the U.S. We've also watched law enforcement work through a deadly pandemic, losing so many officers to COVID-19 over these last 2 years. To make things more difficult, many officers struggle to ask for help even when they need it. Some officers feel traditional forms of counseling cannot truly understand what they're going through. They also might be concerned that seeking counseling could negatively impact on their career. It could be seen as a weakness. And that's why the Cops Counseling Act is so very important. And again, I thank the gentlelady from Texas. This provides the opportunity for law enforcement officers to receive confidential and peer-led support services. Madam Speaker, or Mr. Speaker, this legislation is going to save lives. It's going to save officers' lives, and I urge all of my colleagues to vote yes on the Cops Counseling Act to get this bill signed into law. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas.
You myself, such time as I may consume. I'm very
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Glad that we have able to come together, recognizing that law enforcement officers face dangers every day. And when I look to the support for that community, I really look to the family of citizens, the family of the community, no matter where you are. And I think that should be the statement and the litmus test. When you speak to community persons who generally go about their daily business, you can be assured, and local governments, you can be assured that there is an embodiment of support. There is a sense of horror when we see circumstances that tragically hit this very Congress, this very House on January 6th, when that was not how brave law enforcement officers were treated. But we are well aware of the everyday work that is done. And before I left to come to Washington, I had the tragic duty of going to the funeral of a fallen. What an amazing individual that Deputy Atkins was. And the outpouring of love and affection by the community reflected that. And to show the humanity of officers. They have moms and dads and wives and children. They read a letter from his mother. And I just simply want to put this letter in from his mother. When I last saw you, before you said goodbye, I said the prayer I taught you as I lay me down to sleep. Nadia heard me and told me you always said that prayer. Nadia was his wife. And that made me really feel good, Kareem. I love you so much, and I'll never stop loving you, the letter said. A mother, father, a fallen son. These are the true human aspects of service. And so this help to officers who have seen or been engaged or seen fellow officers lose their life or been wounded or again come upon that scene, that they will be interviewed and saying that they've never seen it before, never seen something so devastating like this before. This is an important step forward, as was the Real Justice Bill for veterans, some of whom turn out to be police officers. So I think we are moving so much in the right direction to be effectively concerned about the whole person, and that's what this legislation, I believe, will move forward on. With that, I reserve my time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Reschenthaler.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my good friend and colleague, Congressman Benz, for yielding me the time. Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to speak in support of the Cops Counseling Act. It's a piece of bipartisan legislation that I introduced with my good friend David Trone of Maryland. Congressman Trone has been an incredible partner. I'm really grateful for all his hard work, and as everybody in this body knows, no one works harder than David Trone when he is pushing a bill. Quite amazing to see and watch. But Mr. Speaker, every day our nation's law enforcement officers put their own lives at risk to keep us safe. That service does not come without sacrifice. Last year, 178 current or active duty law enforcement officers died by suicide. Just this year, 121 officers have already taken their own lives. S1502 seeks to alleviate the stressors law enforcement experiences by establishing clear and confidentiality standards for peer-to-peer counseling. A Fraternal Order of Police survey showed that 73% of surveyed officers found peer-to-peer support counseling to be the most helpful mental health resource offered by police departments. Unfortunately, an officer's peer support communications can be discoverable on public record, it can be used in court proceedings, and worse, it can even impact and affect their employment. By creating clear standards for confidentiality, the Cops Counseling Act will provide officers with peace of mind that their privacy is protected when they seek peer support services. This legislation also encourages state and local first responder agencies to adopt peer counseling programs so more officers can take advantage of this important mental health resource. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support our nation's law enforcement officers by voting for this legislation. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas.
Does the gentleman have more speakers?
No, I'm prepared to close.
Gentlelady from Texas reserved. Gentleman from Oregon is recognized. Gentleman from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentlelady from Texas.
As I indicated, Speaker, I'd like to yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
As I indicated in my discussions, I think the idea of the Cops Counseling Act is a profound statement that we see the whole person in law enforcement. We don't just see the person's uniform externally, but we see the whole person. The reading of the words of Deputy Atkins' mother was to indicate we see the family members, the children, we see the neighbors, we see the communities. And in order to do that, we must then have a holistic approach to the service of these officers. I can't help think about officers coming upon an injury to a child in whatever form it is, and I've heard them speak of it. It is the worst investigation case they have. It's the worst scene that they've ever seen because it is a child. So the Cops Counseling Act will help our law enforcement officers and also the communities they serve. We can and must do both. When officers are in need of counseling, we should remove barriers and disincentives that are standing in the way. Therefore, I ask my colleagues to see the whole person as they serve the community and the nation, and join me in supporting this legislation so that the President can sign it into law. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Generally yields back. All time has expired. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Senate 1502? Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being...
With that,
what purposes, gentlelady from
with that, I would
Texas
ask
seek?
for the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass S. 1511, the Protecting America's First Responders Act, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 1511, an act to amend the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968 with respect to payments to certain public safety officers who have become permanently or totally disabled as a result of personal injuries sustained in the line of duty and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, and the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Bentz, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlelady is recognized.
I support S. 1511, the Protecting America's First Responders Act of 2021, which will make important improvements to the Department of Justice Public Safety Officers Benefits Program. Every day, public safety officers put their lives on the line for the greater good of those whom they have taken an oath to serve and protect. Unfortunately, some of those brave men and women make the ultimate sacrifice and die while in the line of duty. The Public Safety Officers Benefit Program, which is administered by the Justice Department's Bureau of Justice Assistance, was established in 1976 to provide certain benefits to families of these officers as well as to officers who are disabled as a result of their service. A death benefit is provided to eligible survivors of public safety officers whose deaths are sustained in or due to actions in line of duty. An education benefit is provided to spouses and children of public safety officers killed or disabled while on duty. And the program provides disability benefits to officers catastrophically injured in the line of duty. This program provides critical support to these officers and their families, and it is important that Congress continually oversee implementation and periodically update it to make it more effective and more efficient. That is what this bill would do. Specifically, the bill would expand the program's restrictive definition of disability so that permanently disabled first responders are able to perform work for therapeutic purposes, work that involves simple tasks or work that provides special accommodations and still receive PSOB benefits. The bill would provide for retroactive disability benefits to public safety officers who responded to September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, allowing those first responders who became permanently disabled as a result of their work at Ground Zero to reapply for disability benefits under the bill's expanded disability definition. I'm not from New York. I represent Texas. But I was at the edge of the creation of the Homeland Security Committee, which generated around the tragic terrorist act of 9/11. and interacted with those individuals who, time after time, went onto the smoldering grounds of Ground Zero to recover the remains of all that were fallen on that day. They never stopped, Mr. Speaker. Month after month and day after day, we honored those persons in the 20th commemoration of 9/11. I'll speak about that as we continue this debate. No more moving, powerful, tragic, devastating a moment in America's life, among others. So this bill would address lengthy delays in processing benefit claims by permitting DOJ to use subpoena power to expedite claims so that impacted officers and families aren't left waiting for their owed relief during the most difficult times. For cases pending longer than 365 days, the bill would index the award amount to the date of the final determination rather than the date of death or injury, so families aren't financially penalized for any delays. The bill would extend benefits to certain public safety officers not currently covered, including Good Samaritan officers who act outside of their jurisdiction in an emergency situation, trainee officers, and fire police who handle traffic and crime scene management. And the bill would close a loophole in the program where children born after the death or disability of a public safety officer are not able to receive education benefits, and mandate that DOJ provide back pay of educational benefits to children previously left out. Finally, this bill also includes an extension of Safeguarding America's First Responders Act concerning the provision of benefits for officers who contract COVID-19 in the line of duty. I thank the gentleman from New Jersey, dear friend Representative Bill Pascrell, for his leadership of the House companion to this bill, and his longstanding service as a champion of the Fire Caucus, which I'm delighted to have been a part of, and to urge all my colleagues to support this bill today. And I reserve the balance of my time at this time.
Gentleman from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of Senate 1511, the Protecting America First Responders Act of 2021. This bill is about taking care of our federal, state, and local public safety officers who are working on the front lines every day to protect us. Our nation's law enforcement officers need our support now more than ever. Over the past year, we have seen violent crime rise in nearly every major urban area. During this spike in violence, we've seen city councils defund their police departments, taking vital resources away from the brave men and women who protect us day in and day out. And on top of that, our law enforcement officers are dealing with all of the complications of the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the Fraternal Order of Police, over 700 public safety officers have tragically lost their lives due to COVID-19. That number will inevitably continue to rise. The Department of Justice Public Safety Officer Benefit Program provides assistance to officers and their families in the event that they lose their lives or are catastrophically injured in the line of duty. The PSOB program reviews over 1,000 claims submitted every year. The program provides a one-time lump sum payment of $370,000 for officers who lose their lives or who are catastrophically injured in the line of duty. The payment amount is adjusted annually based on the Consumer Price Index. Each claimant's payment amount is determined by the date of the injury or death, but the claim may take years to adjudicate. This bill corrects this inequity by requiring that payment amounts be determined by the date of adjudication for any claim that has been pending for over a year. This bill will help these law enforcement officers and their families account for increased cost of living and other expenses that are subject to inflation during these lengthy adjudication periods. The PSOB program also provides interim payments for death claims if the claimant is likely to receive an award under the program, but the interim payment amount has not increased since 1976. This bill will increase those interim payments for death claims from $3,000 to $6,000 and require annual adjustments based on the Consumer Price Index to ensure that Congress will not need to make further adjustments in the future. The PSOB program also provides educational benefits of $1,200 a month to children of public safety officers who have been killed or disabled in the line of duty. Here, too, many of these claims for education benefits are not adjudicated in a timely fashion, and many children do not receive these benefits. This bill will provide back pay to the children of fallen and disabled public safety officers who qualify for benefits, but failed to receive those benefits due to a delay in processing these claims. And finally, this bill will update the PSOB's program definition of disability to ensure that law enforcement officers who are permanently unable to secure meaningful, gainful employment following a catastrophic injury in the line of duty remain eligible for benefits. This is a critical, necessary piece of legislation. I'm proud to support the bill that takes care of the men and women of our law enforcement community. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, it is my privilege to yield again to the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pascrell, who I have worked with, as have many others, as he has been on the front line of helping first responders, and he continues to do it, and I will continue to work with him. So I yield to him at this time 5 minutes.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, the gentle lady. And it's good to have something bipartisan on this floor, I'll tell you that. Mr. Speaker, during this devastating pandemic, our nation's first responders have stood heroically on the very front lines, keeping communities across America safe. They go to work every day. Our firefighters, police, the EMS, they risk their lives, the lives of their families. In my own district, we lost a Patterson police officer, Frank Scarpo, and a Passaic firefighter, Israel Talentino, to COVID. These men made the ultimate sacrifice for their communities. My heart bleeds for all our fallen first responders and their families. The last year was the deadliest ever for our nation's public safety officers. COVID has made clear as day, that more must be done to support these heroes. Longtime co-chair of the Law Enforcement Caucus and the Fire Services Caucus, I've been proud to lead efforts to pass the bipartisan Protecting America's First Responders Act with Senator Chuck Grassley. I want to thank Senator Grassley for working together to get this bill across the finishing line. He has been a good partner to shepherd this through the other chamber. Currently, the Federal Public Safety Officer Benefits Program only provides disability benefits to first responders who can never again perform any compensated work at all. This is so restrictive that officers practically need to be in a vegetative state to qualify. Our bill will guarantee first responders and their families get their owed benefits without delay or red tape. Our legislation will expand the disability definition so permanently injured first responders can still receive benefits and perform work that is for therapeutic purposes, involve simple tasks, and provide special accommodations. Our legislation provides retroactive disability benefits to injured 9/11 first responders. The bill extends these critical officer safety benefits to groups unfairly left out of the program. This includes trainees, fire police officers, and Good Samaritan first responders who protect the public while off duty. Importantly, our bill extends the statutory presumption that guarantees the families of first responders fallen to COVID-19 receive full public safety officer benefits. I'm glad to work alongside Chairman Nadler to pass this presumption into law last year. I thank him for his efforts to bring the Protecting America's First Responders Act to the floor today. It is especially important because our bill provides an extension of this critical provision. Finally, I want to recognize the fire and police organizations who support our bill. Thank you to the Fraternal Order of Police, the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, the National Association of Police Organizations, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, the National Volunteer Fire Council. I especially want to recognize the International Association of Firefighters for their recent support, and I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record statements from each of these organizations.
Without objection.
The past 18 months has been difficult for our communities, difficult for all Americans. It's been especially unbearable for our men and women in uniform. These brave individuals have protected us at our lowest moment. The least we could do is protect the benefits they've earned and stand with them. And I thank you, and Mr. Speaker, I yield back, and I thank you for your courtesies.
And the gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oregon.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Oregon reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I have pleasure to now yield 1 minute to Dr. Ruiz, committed emergency medicine physician and congressperson and chair of the Hispanic Caucus and co-chair of the COVID-19 bipartisan task force.
California
Yield the gentleman 1 minute.
Recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today in support of S. 1511, the Protecting America's First Responders Act. This bill will go a long way in supporting the families of fallen officers and improving the Public Safety Officers Benefits Program. Improving the PSOB program has been a long-standing priority of mine. In fact, today's legislation includes a provision from my bill, the Heroes Leslie Zarebny and Gil Vega First Responder Survivor Support Act, which fixes the benefit determination date so that families don't lose out on thousands of dollars because of bureaucratic delays. In addition to passing today's legislation, we must also increase the PSOB death and disability benefit to get our law enforcement families the benefit they've earned and deserve. I look forward to working with Chairman Nadler to build on today's success and passing my bill, the First Responder Survivor Support Act, to raise the PSOB benefit this Congress. So I urge my colleagues to support the families of our nation's law enforcement officers and vote yes on the Protecting America's First Responders Act. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oregon.
I reserve.
Gentleman from Oregon reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
Another committed advocate for first responders and who has continued his work on that issue. I'm delighted to yield to the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney, for 1 minute.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Connecticut is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Congresswoman Jackson Lee. I rise in support of the Protecting America's First Responders Act. This is an important bill that includes a provision that I've worked on for the last 3 Congresses to extend the PSOB program to fire police officers. A dozen states have officers designated by law as fire police who provide critical support at the scenes of fires, explosions, serious accidents. They secure the perimeter so that other first responders can do their work safely. However, because there's no uniform national designation for fire police, the current PSOB program doesn't cover these officers, even if they are killed or seriously injured on the job, which sadly has occurred. It is only right they receive the same protection as other public safety officers. This bill eliminates this exclusion and ensures that the fire police and their families get the same benefits others do who provide first responder work. I want to acknowledge the Gales Ferry Fire Department in Ledyard, Connecticut, Fire Chief Anthony Saccone, who has tirelessly advocated for the fire police over the last few years. And thanks to their advocacy and engagement and Mr. Pascrell's great support, we will finally send this fix to the President's desk for signature. And again, I urge passage of the bill and yield back the balance of my time.
From Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have no further speakers, and I'm prepared to close.
The gentleman is recognized.
I urge my colleagues to support this bill and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas.
I'm prepared to close at this time.
Gentlelady is recognized.
As indicated, you have seen the bipartisan and bicameral support of this legislation. And I'm grateful for that because I think this is an important statement in the midst of intense negotiations on Build Back Better and the INVEST Act, of which will be an enormous gift to the American people, including law enforcement, first responders, firefighters, and others. We now take a moment to ensure that there are special benefits for public safety officers. And as I indicated, I had the privilege of being in New York at Ground Zero for the 20th commemoration. And to hear stories of family members where the pain is still deeply embedded. To see babies that are now the relatives of the deceased that they never got a chance to see, to even see their children speak who were babies when they lost their lives in the line of duty in a brave manner. The visual that I had in getting to that area during the recovery, still going on months later, hearing the whistle blow, seeing the gurneys come on, carried by firefighters and others, and remains placed gently on that gurney, makes this even more potent and powerful and important to be able to help. In addition, there are 2 deputies who were wounded in the same tragic incident of the death of Deputy Atkins. And they too need comfort and support, potential benefits that are necessary for their continued survival. I think this legislation impacts any number of men and women around this nation. And having participated with Local 341, President Marty Langton, just this past weekend at the Fire Memorial in Houston, Texas, to note those firefighters who passed in this last year, some suffering from COVID-19, others that we were remembering that died in the line of fires and other tragic incidences. This emphasized more and more the importance of this legislation. So the Public Safety Officers Benefit Program is an important program to address the terrible circumstances in which officers give their lives or are disabled due to their actions in line of duty. Now we work to improve and strengthen this program in the ways we have discussed today. I thank Mr. Pascal and all of the co-sponsors. I was glad to also have the commitment of our House Judiciary Committee as well as the work of Senator Grassley. This is a bipartisan bill that was adopted by the Senate by unanimous consent. And therefore, I ask my colleagues to join me in supporting this legislation so the President can sign it into law. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. All time has expired. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Senate 1511 as amended? Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the measure is passed. Lady from Texas?
Mr. Speaker, with that, I ask for the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, to suspend the rules and pass Senate 1502, upon which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
Senate 1502, an act to make federal law enforcement officer peer support communications confidential and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic vote device.
Designated by Mr. Doggett of Texas, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I rise to inform the House that Mr. Doggett will vote aye on S 1502.
The nays. On this vote, the yeas are 410, the nays. On this vote, the yeas are 4. Have all members voted? Does anyone wish to change their vote? On this vote, the yeas are 424, the nays are 3. 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Do I read all this? Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, to suspend the rules and pass S 1511 as amended, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
Senate 1511, an act to amend the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968 with respect to payments to certain public safety officers who have become permanently and totally disabled as a result of personal injuries sustained in the line of duty and for other purposes.
The question before us is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. From Maryland. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. DeFazio of Oregon, I inform the House that Mr. DeFazio will vote yes on S 1511.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
As a member designated by Mr. Rush, I inform the House that Mr. Rush will vote yes on S 1511.
Got me and you. I'm loving that. Yeah. I'll show it to you.
For 1-minute speeches. On this vote, the yeas are 420, the nays are 3. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The chair will now entertain requests for one-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend, although I never do that.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Otto von Bismarck, in the 1870s, I believe it was, said politics is the art of the possible. It's still true. The Build Back Better bill will be the art of the possible. It will be good for America. It will create jobs. It will help the middle class deal with the burdens and blessings of children, child care, and child tax credits, and education. It will be a very significant bill passed by this Congress to help the middle class and to help those people who haven't been helped in the past, as the Trump tax cuts helped the wealthy. So I look forward to voting for it. Thank the people who are creating the art and making this possible. Politics is the art of the possible. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, the American taxpayers are expected to write the Democrats a blank check for this socialist scam. Democrats want to squeeze as much money as possible from successful individuals and businesses. Madam Speaker, this is completely wrong. We shouldn't be punishing success in America to finance this far-left political agenda. It's obvious why Joe Biden is pushing so hard for an aggressive expansion of government dependency programs and the dismantling of domestic energy production. He wants to virtue signal to his globalist pals during the United Nations Climate Summit this weekend in Scotland. Democrats like Biden are embarrassed and ashamed of our country. He desperately wants acceptance from European countries to boost his progressive ego. Why do we care what foreign elitists think of our country, Madam Speaker? Biden needs to prioritize American citizens instead of European politicians. We do things differently than the rest of the world. I'm proud of our national values. The leader of our government should take pride in the country he leads too. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield the remainder of my time.
For what purpose does a gentlewoman from from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Yesterday, I said there was going to be breaking news, and there is breaking news. Does anyone know that the great Houston Astros are in the World Series, and that this congressperson representing Minute Maid in the Houston Astros is saying they're in it to win it? And I am challenging my sister from Georgia, Congresswoman Williams, with Dusty Baker as a coach and stellar baseball people, for some catfish and barbecue that you have never eaten before against those Atlanta Braves. I yield to the gentlelady.
Madam Speaker, in Atlanta, we're known for making history and a little bit of good trouble as the home of Congressman John Lewis, the home of hammering Hank Aaron, who was an Atlanta Brave. We're ready to make history once again and win this World Series just like we won the first game last night.
And
we will be ready with a nice Southern soul food dinner.
I love it. Madam Speaker, catfish and barbecue, yes, Dusty Baker and all of our ball hitters and Barbara Jordan, we are in it to win it. The
Go
Houston
Braves.
Astros.
For what purpose does a gentleman from Georgia wish to be recognized?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize October of 2021 as Hindu Heritage Month. Hinduism is the third largest religion in the world. With 3 million devotees in the United States, Georgia's 1st Congressional District is home to many Hindu followers. The Hindu heritage, culture, and tradition serve as a source of inspiration for the individuals who look to the teachings of Hinduism for guidance. The Hindu American community has contributed tremendously to our community, enriching the lives of our citizens. As doctors, lawyers, artists, business leaders, and government officials, the Hindu community has contributed immensely to the state of Georgia and our great nation. This month, the Hindu community will celebrate their heritage by focusing on their culture and their traditions rooted in India. Madam Speaker, I call upon my colleagues to join me in recognizing October as Hindu Heritage Month. To those celebrating, I wish all a joyous celebration of Hindu Heritage Month 2021. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Nevada seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At the height of this pandemic, unemployment in my home district of Las Vegas was over 33%, a level not seen since the Great Depression. The fabulous Las Vegas Strip shut down and the airport was empty. Now, thanks to Democrats, we're coming back. Vaccination rates are up, unemployment rates are down, and travelers are returning. But it's not enough to restore the country to where we were when COVID hit. We need to build back better. This crisis has highlighted systemic inequalities that must be addressed. The Build Back Better agenda allows us an opportunity to do just that by lifting working families, providing a pathway to citizenship, taking historic action on climate change, and making the wealthy contribute their fair share. This is our moment, and we must seize it. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
To request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, with executive order after executive order, President Biden dismantled America's energy dominance. In the first days of his administration, President Biden killed the Keystone Pipeline, paused new oil and gas drilling and production on U.S. lands, and destroyed thousands of good-paying jobs. My Republican colleagues and I sounded the alarm, knowing that this type of short-sighted policy would have a devastating impact on our economy and national security. Now, energy prices are rising with winters quickly approaching, and hidden deep in the Democrats' reconciliation plan is a tax on heating your home that could leave Americans paying 50% more to keep warm this winter. That's absurd. And to make it worse, President Biden said he doesn't have a near-term answer for America's energy crisis. Well, we Republicans do. We have an answer. It starts with reversing Biden's harmful energy policies and investing in American energy. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in recognition of Mother Esther Everett, a longtime resident of Westland in Michigan's 13th Congressional District, as we mourn her passing. Mother Everett was best known in the community for her volunteer work. As a coordinator for the Wayne County Retired Senior Volunteer Program, she recruited, trained, and assigned volunteers. She also served as family service advocate for Wayne County Family Center, facilitating and expediting folks to independent living arrangements for many of our residents and aided with placement and health care services. Ms. Everett spearheaded the, quote, No Family Without Christmas program, collecting donations for the homeless during the winter holiday season. Throughout her work with Southeast Westland Homeowners Association, Mother Everett founded the SWHA Community Center, where for many years she operated an after-school program for young people. Please join me in recognizing the many contributions of Mother Esther Everett to Westland, Wayne County, and the 13 District Strong as we honor her memory.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Under the failed leadership of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, our nation faces challenges unlike any we've seen since the administration of former President Jimmy Carter. Hardworking Americans are facing an inflation crisis that is driving up the price of almost everything we purchase. We are facing a supply chain crisis where people are unable to buy goods and services they need to live productive lives. We are facing a border crisis where our border agents are so overwhelmed that we cannot account for the drugs being smuggled into our country or stop potential terrorists from entering our nation. We are facing an energy crisis where the price of gas has reached a 7-year high and heating costs are projected to rise over 50% as winter nears. Every one of these crises are the results of policies this administration and progressive members of this Congress have pursued instead of working to help Americans get back on their feet. It's time to reverse course, to cut spending, promote good-paying jobs, and secure our borders. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, prior to coming to Congress, I worked in education for 20 years. I served as a public school elementary teacher, a high school counselor, and a middle school principal for 10.5 years. And I can tell you without a doubt that the Build Back Better Act is going to be transformative for our democracy for generations to come. And the reasons are many, including climate change and investments in home care. But our investments in our children, particularly in early childhood education, focusing on expanding the child tax credit, universal 3K programs, and making sure we have almost universal child care will prepare our children, our babies, to enter kindergarten hitting the ground running. And as we know, when we invest in early childhood education, we have much better health, education, and economic outcomes with decreased costs in prison as well as health care. So this is an exciting time. I'm blessed to be a part of this Congress during this time, and I just want to celebrate the Build Back Better Act's investment in our youngest, most precious resource, our babies and our children. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address House 1 minute, revise and extend remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. It's my honor today to highlight the work of Senator K. Maurice Johannesson in Northern California, who's still working hard at it, helping our veterans. He was born in Norway many years ago, immigrated to the United States, and joined the Army in 1953 during the Korean War, and he served our nation for over 12 years there. In 1960, he moved to Redding, where he met his wife, Marianne, and raised their family. After several years in local government, he's elected to the California State Senate, where he was for 9 years. He chaired the Senate Veterans Committee and authored over 47 veterans bills, and notably created the Northern California Veterans Cemetery in Igo, California, and 5 new veterans homes around the state. Noticing his commitment to that, Governor Davis appointed him as Secretary for the California Department of Veterans Affairs. Upon retirement from the Senate and the Secretary position, he didn't stop serving our region. He's still using his own resources and community support to get a Veterans Memorial Chapel and now a state-of-the-art Veterans Medical Clinic in Shasta County. On behalf of Northern California, Sir Maurice, we appreciate your service. We'd like to thank you for all your devotion to our region. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I rise to address the House for 1 minute and ask unanimous consent to do so.
All right, without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I thought I would like to place on the record this afternoon the fact that very important negotiations are going on both sides of the Capitol relative to the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better bill. And I just wanted to point out to all those who hear my voice that there is no one from the Great Lakes a party to those dialogues with a major position in either chamber. And I think it's really important to sensitize those who are in the room that whatever you do, don't forget the industrial heartland of America. Our leaders are fine leaders in both parties. They come from both coasts. They come from other regions of the country. But the industrial heartland is notable by its absence in those in the rooms who are doing the negotiation. I know if we alert them to the fact that we exist and that we have huge needs ranging from rail freight to seaborne commerce to industrial revitalization, the list is very long, but I just wanted to point that fact out, and I know if my voice is heard by the administration, by those in the respective committees, they will respond accordingly. I thank you very much for allowing me to place these words on the record, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, President Biden's energy policies have triggered 7-year high gas prices that are hammering American families and small business owners. Today, gas prices are 50% higher than a year ago. In Montgomery, folks are paying $3.09 a gallon, Enterprise $3.21, Eufaula Troy $3.29. At these prices, the average Alabamian will pay about $23 a week more on gasoline. That's more than $100 a month, $1,200 a year. Gas prices impact small businesses too. I'm a small business owner, and countless small businesses like mine that are highly dependent on gas prices are being hammered right now with these high prices. Almost all goods and services must be delivered via gas at some point. So it's basic economics. When the price of gas goes up, the price of everything goes up. That's on top of the near-record inflation being driven by our out-of-control government spending. This insanity has to stop, or the pain at the pump will continue. Biden must end his war on American energy, and we must defeat his socialist tax and spend agenda. And with that, I yield back.
Pursuant to Section 11B of House Resolution 188, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.